simplify the clearance process, so appreciate that. Also, just a shout out to ClearanceJobs. You know, it's been fun to see this event grow year over year, and just realize the importance of the platform that you guys create for industrial security, human capital professionals, and allowing us all to connect, to collaborate. So thank you for that. Before we get started, I just want to see a show of hands. How many people have heard of Trusted Workforce 2.0 before?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Good, I like to see that level of awareness. Well, the goal of today's panel is really to arm everyone with helpful information about where we've come, what we're doing today, and where we're going so that we can make you and your firms more effective as the personnel vetting mission continues to evolve. A couple high-level details regarding Trusted Workforce. Trusted Workforce 2.0 is a complete re-architecture of the policies that underpin the personnel vetting enterprise across all of government. It's the biggest of its kind in the last 50 plus years. To date, Trusted Workforce has published nearly 40 personnel vetting policies to include regulations, executive orders, and memorandums. It's also been credited with playing a primary role in helping reduce the investigative backlog at OPM based on the historic data breach that I'm sure we all remember. And probably most topical and current for this group, it established the policy on-ramp to create the continuous vetting program, of which there's currently more than 4 million people in the national security population enrolled. Just a quick reminder for the group, we are going to save time at the end for Q&A, so if you have questions, please hold them, write them down. We'll have runners in the audience, and I know we'll have some good ones. I've already talked to Tim, so looking forward to that. And without further ado, want to introduce our panelists here. So to my right, Matt Eanes, Director of the Performance Accountability Council, Program Management Office. Mark Fraunfelter, Assistant Director, Special Security Directorate, National Counterintelligence and Security Center, under the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. You know, I think based on that history that I walked through, I think it's fair to say you guys and your programs have been very busy for the last several years. And looking forward to getting into a little bit more about where we've come and I think more importantly, where we're going. So Mark, to start with you, Trusted Workforce 2.0 implies an iterative approach. Can you walk us through the primary phases of Trusted Workforce and then where we are overall with regard to adoption?
Yeah, sure, Brett, thank you. And thank you all for being here. But yeah, iterative is probably a very good word to use because we are tackling one of the most aggressive clearance reform efforts in decades, and this isn't going to be a simple flip of the switch and then all of a sudden everything is applied and implemented. So just a level set, there are 4 PAC principles, OD&I and Matt's team who leads the PAC effort, and then OUS, DINS, and OPM. We all work collectively to tackle this problem. So it all started back in 2018 when we were facing a 725,000 case backlog of inventory of investigations. Clearances were taking upwards of more than a year to get through. And we also had what we're going to call a spaghetti chart of policies that were all over the place and not really aligned. These were policies over the last few decades that were just I'm going to call them ad hoc policies to tackle an issue or a concern with no real vision to align security, suitability, credentialing, and fitness. So the first phase was to really tackle that backlog and start working a policy framework. So the backlog was brought down eventually with the good leadership that we had in place with NBIB going to DCSA. And that was tackled to what we call a steady state. And then we implemented the continuous vetting capability, which I'm sure I saw all the hands of Trusted Workforce, a lot of you are familiar with. So we have successfully moved away from the traditional periodic reinvestigation model to a continuous vetting model. And we've done this for the national security population, and now we're looking to expand it, starting with the non-sensitive public trust population. So a huge effort, systems were built, and we're seeing the benefits of that, tremendous benefits, and we're getting a lot of good feedback. And the good thing about continuous vetting that we've seen is not only does it surface information in near real time to act on from a security standpoint, but it also has a wellness factor that if someone is facing something like a financial hardship, a substance abuse issue, something that can be we can leverage the government resources very quickly so that these people can get the assistance they need. And we've seen a tremendous benefit, and it allows these people to stay in the workforce and be a productive member of the workforce, and also kind of right the ship instead of waiting 5 or 10 years till something may go south where an adverse security action is warranted. So a lot of benefits of continuous vetting. So that all in place, we're moving into phase 3, or have moved into phase 3. And phase 3 is really what I'm going to call the implementation phase, where we are getting all of our IT and technology advancements in place to accommodate all these changes. And the other thing, if you think back, really we had a one-size-fits-all mentality for investigations, and now we've implemented, or we've given guidance and identified 5 different vetting scenarios. So you have someone who leaves the federal government, and we call it a reestablishment of trust. They want to come back into the federal government. That is going to be vetted with a common sense approach now, instead of just a one-size-fits-all where we'll do an initial if they break service for more than 2 years. Transfer of trust and is a model where someone is moving from one agency to another. So we're looking at the vetting type of scenario there. Again, a common sense approach, and then upgrades, right? Someone who needs to go from one position to another, which requires a higher clearance. So we're looking at all these models, and this is where we are now to really dig deep into that and make sure that departments and agencies can implement these different vetting scenarios in a way that really just makes a lot of sense, so that we don't have to duplicate vetting that's already been done. And we can make a risk-managed determination just as effectively as if we just did an initial investigation, as kind of done in the previous times. So that's where we are today. A lot going on. I know we'll get into a lot more of the details, but that's just a general overview of the different phases and where we are today.
And I'd like to double down a little bit. You mentioned non-sensitive public trust, and also a focus on national security positions being enrolled in CV as an early stage of trusted workforce. Matt, I was hoping you could give us a little bit more detail about non-sensitive public trust. What positions qualify as non-sensitive public trust? Why do we need to move them into continuous vetting? And how is that going to help overall with workforce mobility?
Okay, a bit to unpack there. So I think the best place to start with that is probably providing some clarity on, can people in the back hear me? I'm not very big, so I don't project well. Thank you. On clarity on what the populations are, for a very long time, at least in defense industry, we've kind of referred to folks as either being cleared or uncleared, and that's not really the right way to think about the population segments. So you guys are hearing terms like NSPT or non-sensitive public trust now, and you're like, what the heck does that mean? So the way the policy and regulations are set up, if you go read 5 CFR 1400, which creates a structure based off of position sensitivity, there's really 3 main populations to consider. The first are national security sensitive positions. So this is what you traditionally think of as folks who are in top secret positions or secret positions. But there's also a third population that sits into that called the sensitive not in access population. So these are folks who work on like the border, or they're working at jails or CBP, and they're in charge of people who may be detained. So they don't have access to classified information, but through their actions, they could cause grave harm to our national security. So that's the national security sensitive lane of the population. And that's about 4.6 million people. And right now, all of those people are enrolled in continuous vetting, and we're the focus of the first phase of continuous vetting that Mark mentioned. The second population is the non-sensitive public trust population. So these are folks that you may have heard as high-risk public trust or moderate-risk public trust. Traditionally, they've gotten Tier 2 or Tier 4 background investigations. So these could be accountants, sysadmins, network admins, those type of positions. And this is what we're starting our next phase of the journey with continuous vetting for now. And then the third population segment are the low-risk positions. So these are people who are not members of the public trust as defined in the executive order or defined in CFR 1400 or 731. So these are people who may work at a commissary, stocking shelves. They may do groundskeeper work or mow lawns, do janitorial work. There is a couple million of these people supporting the government in some capacity or another, just kind of in the margins of things. And we often don't think about them because everyone's focused on all of these top secret and SCI positions. But those three population segments make up the full population. And in the traditional model, low risk gets tier 1s, moderate risk gets tier 2, secret gets tier 3, high risk public trust gets tier 4, and top secret gets tier 5. And the 3-tier model that Mark mentioned, low risk will get tier low, moderate risk public trust and secret will get tier moderate, and high risk public trust and top secret will get tier high. So that's kind of how things start to collapse together for the 3 population segments. So what our goal is right now is we roll out the non-sensitive public trust. It started just a couple days ago. We did a soft launch 2 months ago and have been working on that. Got 10,000 people enrolled, kicking the tires and working through the kinks in the process. We've got about 1 million people in this population to enroll, and the goal is to get them enrolled by the end of FY25. So what that means for the industrial base is if you've got folks who work for you and they're at DHS or VA or GSA and they're not in national security sensitive positions, we're going to start knocking on their door, asking them to fill out forms, get enrolled in these systems, and they'll be in continuous vetting. And the goal is to have everyone in by the end of FY25. Why are we doing this, Brett asked, and there's kind of 3 big reasons. The first is it's just a better model for risk management. The data from the national security sensitive population is inarguably better from a risk management perspective. We're finding out information on the top secret positions over 3 years faster than the traditional model. For secret positions, it's 7 years, 8 months faster than the traditional model. So it's just a better to find things out earlier. But it's also, as Mark said, better from a wellness perspective, because when you can catch things when they're small, they don't have a chance to get big. And that means people can stay in the workforce, and that the money we put into training them and teaching them and having them learn and all of the knowledge capital that goes into place, the money that goes into recruiting them and staffing them, doesn't go to waste when that person gets walked out the door because their credit issue or their life event got too big before it could get managed, and then they have a chance to get access to EAP assistance or get their life in order for whatever the event was. So the first big issue is risk management, way better model. The second is that this is a critical pacing item for us to sunset the legacy systems. DCSA, I think, is up next, so you'll hear them call these the BEES system, BIES. Sometimes you hear it referred to as PIPs, but it's $140 million of annual investment that we need to shed as we roll into the new systems, and the new systems aren't being built to do periodic reinvestigations. So until we get this population fully enrolled, we can't sunset the legacy systems, and that's going to become very expensive to do a handful of PRs a year. And then the third reason is really structured around mobility of the workforce and getting people to work faster. The first component of that is the common tiers that I mentioned, low, moderate, and high. Once we start to fold these together and people come through and their initial vetting gets them a tier moderate, if they're in a national security sensitive position, they'll receive both a secret determination and a moderate risk public trust determination, and that will be good, or a fitness determination. But if they are just in a public trust position, they will already have the same base level of investigation. So instead of having to wait an extra 100 days or 80 days, however long the investigation takes, to get them into a secret position, all we have to do is re-adjudicate that. So it takes a 100-day process and shrinks that down to a 20-day process. And then if their case is clean and we can apply e-adjudication to it, it shrinks it down to a same-day process. So it really helps collapse the tiers, which makes the process more efficient, which makes the workforce more mobile between position types, which is good because it expands the talent pool. So now all of these people who might be a high-risk public trust cloud engineer can then be put in for a top secret cloud engineer position and not have to wait 168 days. That's good for everyone. It's good for national security, it's good for recruiting, it's good for companies, it's good for the government, it's good for the mission. So it expands the talent pool. The second is within the existing systems. This is a little minutia, but the low-side repositories now are limited to only accept one type of determination when the determination is rendered. So if you staff people at DHS today, when they render a determination on a person, they're giving them a top secret and a high-risk public trust behind the scenes in their local system. But when they put that into the national repository, they can only post one determination, and they post the highest one, which is the national security determination. So then if you have that person and you're trying to move them to VA or GSA or HHS, and they pull them up in the system, they see they have a top secret, but they don't have a suitability or fitness determination. So they're like, well, we have to request the investigation so we can render one. And that's because the system only accepts one determination. That's dumb. So we're going to fix that. So the new system is going to accept all of the determinations that are rendered. And what that means is when you're moving people between agencies as part of transfer of trust, which Mark talked about, it's going to be easier to move them because the determinations are going to be in the system to reciprocally accept. And that gets talent to task faster. That's good for everybody. And then the third reason is the underlying checks that are being put in place for continuous vetting for the national security population and the non-sensitive public trust population form the basis of the checks that we're using for something called high yield checks. So this is the underlying automated record checks that are going to fire as soon as the person hits submit on their application. We're going to go check X and Y and Z databases, and that's going to come back very quickly. And we're going to have that information in order to render a determination early in the process that's very well informed. Right now, across the interagency, we've got some agencies who are bringing people in on like interim secret with clean prints and clean 86, and you come right in the door. But then you get some people walked like 3 weeks later when we run some of the checks, and then they come back, and we're like, oh, well, this person lied on their form, so now they're getting walked. Well, in the future, we're not going to have to do that because we're going to have the information up front on day 2. Better for risk management, better for the person in the process, better for the company in the process, better for the mission, because we're not taking somebody out that we just put in. So these same checks that are being run for the continuous vetting are going to get run as part of the initial process right up front, which means we're going to be making better preliminary determination decisions, better interims. It's also going to mean that more agencies are going to take advantage of those. So a lot of agencies today don't want to take the risk of bringing someone in with very small amount of checks. So they're like, we're not going to participate in that. When these checks fully roll out, now we'll be able to run them up front, so more agencies will take advantage of them, which means more people get to work faster and less of those people get walked once they come in the door. So again, good for the person, good for the company, good for the mission, good for the government. So I think that covered everything.
Yeah. And I want to pull the mobility thread, and I know a topic that's near and dear to Mark's heart. You mentioned reciprocity and transfer of trust. That was a common theme that we heard about in some of the plenary sessions earlier today. But it's a common human capital talent acquisition pain point, especially in the IC, getting people in from outside agencies and working through that mobility. Mark, if you could just speak to, given what Matt said, where are we with regard to reciprocity, transfer of trust, and making that process more seamless within the IC? And then a secondary question to that is, are we applying resources, training, energy around reforming the polygraph program? Because we know that historically, that's been a snag when we look at the end-to-end process.
Yes. Yeah, let me start by saying when we initially tried to tackle reciprocity through SEAD 7, we were focusing mainly on that security determination. And what we've learned since then, and what we should have saw then, is it's a lot more than just that security determination. When you move from one agency to another, especially within the IC, one thing, the intelligence community does have some additional enhanced screening requirements that come into play many times. The other thing is when you look at the security determination, if Matt moved from CIA to NSA, for example, the first thing I would do as a security practitioner is I would pull up when his last investigation was done and does he have a polygraph. So I'd see those two things, and now I can say, is he enrolled in continuous vetting? And yep, he meets all the mark there, and he has the tickets that he needs to transfer to this agency. But what I haven't considered is, how do I get him an NSA net account? How do I get him badge? How do I get him in the door? What is the HR requirements? Does he need a medical evaluation, a psych eval? So all these things come into play. And when we're going to look at this transfer of trust, we are going to look holistically and see what we can accomplish from a broad spectrum of consistencies to have people more seamlessly move from one agency to another. So I think we've effectively tackled that security determination piece, because at the data we're collecting, people are reporting, especially in the IC, that security determination and DCSA reports, that this is taking either 5 business days or less, that security determination. But what it's not factoring in is that end-to-end process, the personnel mobility that is more broad. And I know, Kathy, you and your group have done a lot of papers on this, looking to examine it. So one thing we did was we stood up at the DNI's request an IC reciprocity working group. So we brought practitioners, personnel security experts in from throughout the IC and said, what is the issue? How can we get over this issue of mobility that is just taking forever to go from one agency to another, even though they have all the security determinations in place that would allow for seamless mobility. So one thing that we discovered that was a big shortcoming is if I move from CIA to NSA, all of my self-reporting is stuck at CIA, and NSA has no visibility into that. So what are my foreign national contacts? What kind of travel have I done? So what we are looking to do is develop a system, and it's called TORUS, and we named it the Transparency of Reciprocity Information System, TORUS. And what this is going to allow is my self-reporting, my CV alerts and hits, and what that adjudication was of those. It's going to have my latest SF-86 former PVQ, and my gaining agency is going to have visibility into all of that. So they can quickly look. They don't have to have me regurgitate all my foreign national contacts. They don't have to have me fill out a form so that it meets their mission requirements. So we're really excited about this. We just actually recently received notification from Congress that they are funding us a nice little pot of money to build this system. So that's one thing that's going to help tremendously. And we can get TORUS up. The other thing that TORUS is going to do is we are working with the NBIS developers and also the team that's building the PVQ on the DCSA side, and that's going to be able to talk to each other. So if we can get that PVQ loaded up to the high side immediately, that's going to save a lot of work. So the intelligence community, the people who sat on this working group, this is what they said they need to help with transfer of trust, especially throughout the IC. We're still going to have issues where people need a polygraph, people need a medical eval, that maybe they were lacking that before coming from, for example, from a DoD agency over to the IC. So that's just what we have to tackle. But one thing, you mentioned the polygraphs, Brett. We also did a deep data dive into polygraphs, how much time they take. And we did find a discrepancy that polygraphs for staff and applicants are prioritized over contract personnel. So our industrial partners have to wait longer to get their polygraphs than staff and applicants. So we put out a timeliness standard, which the DNI signed out in June, that bridges that gap. So the gap of scheduling a polygraph for a staff or applicant and an industrial partner is going to be much closer, and that's mandated. So that should help. We're hoping that will help. The other thing is we're working very closely with NACA and DCSA, and DCSA has done a really good job on working with the polygraph school. We have been able to increase the ability to enroll students into that program by about 75%. So we're going to have more people going through that system in a much more timely basis. And we have agencies like NSA, CIA, who are chomping at the bit to get those students enrolled. So they're coming out at a much quicker pace. So our polygraph capacity is going to increase. So we should see improvements there. The other thing is we are setting up what we're going to call a credibility assessment board that's going to be co-led by DOD, the Undersecretary for Security and Intelligence, and then we're going to have a intelligence community co-chair, and they're going to work on different polygraph issues to see how we can tackle this and make it more efficient, and the timeliness of polygraph should increase after that. So a lot of work to be done, but we are recognizing again that SEED 7 is going to have to be rewritten because it just focuses on the security determination, and we're going to align that SEED with what we're doing with the transfer of trust vetting scenario through Trusted Workforce 2.0. So a lot going on, a lot to tackle, but we are making progress. Hopefully that answered your question,
Yeah,
Brett.
thank you, Mark. I'd recommend the audience, if you haven't done so already, go to performance.gov. A lot of what we're talking about here is boiled up into milestones as it relates to personnel vetting reform. As I was looking at that, at those reform milestones on performance.gov that are released quarterly, by the way, it's clear that we've hit the majority of the policy milestones related to trusted workforce as we know it today. And you all have talked about some of the operational considerations when it comes to marrying some of the IT capability with those policies and actually implementing those. I know that there's several objectives being worked by DCSA on the MBIS front that'll help us realize some of the capabilities that you talked about. But from a policy standpoint, given where we've come and the progress that we've made, where do we go next? Is there a Trusted Workforce 3.0, and what may that look like?
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before I answer that, let me just expand on one thing that Mark said that I want to make sure folks didn't miss. The traditional model for reciprocity, and now as we move into transfer of trust, is very much based on the last investigation date that somebody had. But the future model is going to be based on their continuous vetting status. And the reason that's really important is we've got a bunch of people out there right now who are stuck where they're currently working because their current place didn't submit them for a periodic reinvestigation for like too long. And now they're out of scope and you can't move them from A to B because B won't take them because they need a new investigation. And they don't want to submit them because they want someone who's already vetted. So this is going to get rid of that problem that we know exists right now. And so in the repositories, as we start to move into the future model, the recruiters and the FSOs are going to start looking for somebody's continuous vetting status. We've got a bunch of rules as well on reestablishment of trust if someone's left for too long and how all of that's going to work. All of that's in a document called the Personnel Vetting Management Standards, which was recently issued by the executive agents, and is a good segue into Brett's question on what's next for Trusted Workforce. And thank you for the free plug on performance.gov. And as he mentions, performance.gov has been tracking a number of milestones. There's like 140 or so milestones that are part of the update that we provide every quarter. And we're getting pretty close to updating or finishing nearly all of them. There's still some that aren't done yet. But the reason for that is we're just finishing a phase of Trusted Workforce and getting ready to move into the next phase. So while we're not quite ready for Trusted Workforce 3.0, we are moving into phase 3 of Trusted Workforce. So phase 1 was focused on fixing the backlog, pulling the inventory numbers down, getting timeliness back in the box, moving DCSA, our NBIB at the time to DCSA, getting all of that stood up, hardening the systems that were breached, et cetera. Phase 2 was getting all the policies in place. So the last document that I just mentioned, the PVMS, was the last document to be implemented as part of the core policies. Brett mentioned 40 or so policies have been issued. The other thing that happened in phase 2 was to get the full national security sensitive workforce into continuous vetting. So we've finished the policies and we've finished getting the workforce enrolled into continuous vetting, and that wraps up phase 2. We're now moving into phase 3, which is implementation of the rest of the model that exists in those 40 policy documents and the 5 vetting scenarios Mark mentioned: initial vetting, continuous vetting, upgrades, transfer of trust, and reestablishment of trust. The whole process being re-engineered to be structured around how a person flows through the vetting process, what they experience in the scenarios and situations in which it's happening to them. Initials to take an outsider and make them an insider, continuous vetting to maintain trust in a person, upgrade to elevate the level of trust, transfer of trust to move someone around, and reestablish trust to take someone who left and bring them back in. Those are the 5 ways that personnel vetting engages with the workforce. So where we're at right now is we're moving from phase 2 to phase 3. So the next version of the quarterly progress report that you see on performance.gov is getting a pretty major overhaul for what the phase 3 milestones look like. The last version you saw that was published in June were primarily the phase 2 milestones and getting ahead of some of the phase 3 milestones to get those things in place. And now the whole thing is getting restructured to be all focused on phase 3, which is implementation of these 5 scenarios. So it's broken into 7 sections, 1 section for each scenario. So how are we going to implement each of these 5 things? There is a 6th section for shared services. So this is NBIS, which will be talked about next, but also the systems that Mark's team runs, Taurus and Scattered Castles, a system called SMART. There's other shared services that exist. So that's the 6th one. And then the 7th one is keeping an eye on improving performance, because while we do this, we have to guard against performance slips, but we also have a performance management standards and performance management implementation guidance that significantly reduce the amount of time that it's supposed to take in order to do background investigations for initials. And we've got to start working towards achieving those performance targets in the executive agent's issuances. So there's 7 sections in that document now, and it'll post mid-October. So we've finished making the updates now. It's going through coordination. And then we've got to get it through front office coordination, and we'll issue it. So probably the 2nd or 3rd week of October. We usually issue it the 2nd week or the beginning of the 3rd week of every quarter. And it's an arrears 1 quarter. So that's what is in that document that you will see. You'll also see a section in there that draws attention to focus areas for FY25. So this year is going to have 4 big focus areas. The first is continuous vetting. So we've talked about this a bit already, of getting the non-sensitive public trust population into continuous vetting. But there's also some work we need to do on the national security side. There's some work that we need to do to bolster some of the capabilities to make it more efficient and more effective. So there's a whole series of activity related to continuous vetting for this year. Second is this year, some of the ISPs will start to roll out the new products. So it's a phased delivery over time. So the new initial vetting, low, moderate, and high, some of the early adopter ISPs are going to start doing that in FY25. So depending on which agencies you support, you may support one of the ISPs who's going to start doing new tier high cases instead of tier 5 cases. But all of that will be kind of managed in the back end. It won't have a big impact on you, but you'll notice the repository will now say tier high instead of tier 5 when it gets finished. And we'll be transparent in the quarterly release on who's starting what so everyone can track it along the way. There'll also be new products and services starting to roll out for reestablishment of trust and transfer of trust as we update the low side and high side repositories. Mark mentioned earlier the transfer of trust and reciprocity changes and what's happening in Scattered and Taurus, and then on the low side for DISH JVS is going to unlock some of the early capabilities for those scenarios. More stuff to be done in 26, where most of it's going to happen, but we're going to try to gain some of the early efficiencies in 25 that can help speed up getting people to work for some small amounts of work early in the process. The third area is shared services, so focusing on rolling out NBIS and, so focus on rolling out NBIS, focus on rolling out getting Taurus stood up, not rolling out this year, but getting Taurus stood up and some other changes. For the agencies, they have a bigger impact on this because as we start to roll out the shared services, agencies will start to sunset their systems and roll into the shared services. Not as a big impact on industry, but what you will see is a smoother process across agencies as more information is available and more consistency in the process exists on the government side. And then last area for FY25 for focus areas is around performance improvement. We've got some work to do to improve the timeliness targets, which are creeping up a little bit right now, so we're focused on drawing those down. But you'll also see a push in two core areas. One is in improving the adoption of e-adjudication from agencies. There are new e-adjudication rules that are going to roll out. They're going through the executive agent clearance right now to expand the rule set. We're tuning some of the rules to make them a little bit more efficient. And we're pushing on more agencies to adopt them. What that means is people just get to work 20 to 30 days faster than they would have if they go through e-adjudication instead of human adjudication. Because the case is clean, there's nothing derogatory to look at. So that's good for everybody involved. The second is the expansion of preliminary determinations. As some of these high yield checks run out, we're working with the agencies, more and more agencies to adopt those. So we've got a list of agencies right now we're working with to get on board to adopt those capabilities. And when that happens, if you support those agencies, that it used to take you 140 days to get someone through for a nonsense of public trust or 80 days to get them through for a secret. Now they might be able to come on day 14 after the early checks are run while the rest of the investigation is happening. And again, that's good to get people to work faster at a very low amount of risk. So that's the 4 focus areas for this year. All of that will be posted in a couple of weeks on performance.gov, so you'll be able to read it and see what's to come.
We'll revisit the 3.0 next year. So it sounds like there's some good stuff in order before then. We have a couple minutes before we get into Q&A. Before we do that, what's the one thing that you would each ask the audience to take back to their teammates, their companies, as it relates to reform? What can they do to help? And what's the message that they should be sharing with their teams to support adoption?
So I'll start. I think, we've talked a lot about the policies and the technical piece, but I think it's important too to recognize that we are looking holistically at the changing landscape of society. And one thing that we really have to focus on is recruitment and retention. And so the days of a college student fearful for applying to a job with the federal government or in the intelligence community because they smoked pot in their dorm room 4 months ago once, those days are over. We need to look at how we view society in the changing landscapes. Marijuana is a good example. Mental health is another example that we've worked very hard to change the personnel vetting questionnaire to eliminate the need to report things like treatment and counseling for depression and anxiety. So we're hoping that as we mature from this decades-old type of view of what a trusted person is, and we modernize that we can really promote recruitment and retention. So I think if you could take back a message that things like mental health, marijuana, that is a changing landscape, and people should not shy away from trying to pursue careers, especially within the intelligence community, just because of a few things on their record that they deem might be disqualifying. So I'll throw that out there.
Matt, anything else?
I'm going to cheat and give you 3 things.
Show off.
Yeah. The first is we ask for everyone's patience. We are in the midst of a pretty tectonic plate shift in the model. We used the same model to vet people for the last 70 years since World War II. And in only a couple years, we're changing all of that infrastructure out. To date, it's been relatively smooth as we've transitioned folks into CV. A lot of work has been put into trying to engineer the disruption on industry and the workforce to be as little as possible. But we're going to experience a bit more turbulence as we get into the other 4 scenarios. And it's not quite as seamless because the changeover for some of the old model to the new is a little bit bumpier. So we ask for everyone's patience and your support in helping push it forward. We're all on the same team. We share the same goals of getting trusted people to work so we can do the work of the American people. The second area would be please try to start conversations to share best practices among each other. We attend a lot of industry events and all of the different forums, and we get no end of good recommendations on things we need to do differently. And we hear very little conversation on what industry can do better to help adapt to all of the changes we're throwing at you. And we think it would be really healthy to have cross-company conversations on here's how we're handling this NSPT rollout, and here's what we learned from it, and here's the templates we're using to send to our workforce to communicate it or whatever, because like we're not in a position to do that for you guys, and we can only communicate what we expect, and we have no idea how you guys work internally. And we get end-around feedback loops on that of this and that, and this is confusing, and we're like, well, we talked to Greg at Booz, and he figured it out, so go talk to Greg. So, more conversations between companies, I think, would be great if you guys would be willing to just pick up the phone or introduce those things in the various forums that you're in. All of you are going to be experiencing the same sets of changes from us, but maybe at different points in time, depending on your customer base, how national security centric they are. They're at the front of the line. If they're kind of sitting in the middle like DHS, where they have a split population, they're kind of here. The civilian agencies are back here. And then you've got some agencies with a lot of low risk population, and they're not going to be rolling out some of these changes for a couple of years. So it's really kind of going to take us a while to shift things over, and there's a lot of lessons to learn along the way. And then the third is we host a series of industry listening tour events. We do these every month where we put out a call for anyone who wants to dial in, and we raise a question about X, Y, or Z thing, and then we stop talking and we start listening. If you want to help make the process better, please participate in those. Send your folks who you think would add value. Each month is a different deep dive topic. We're going to have one, as Mark was talking a little bit about marijuana and different things for how the process works. I don't know if it's in October or November, but we're going to focus one on what's the lived experience of the process and where are we doing things that may be able to be improved for how we're engaging with the workforce. We'll probably have one early next year on how the non-sensitive public trust rollout is happening and things that we need to do differently. There's going to be one focused at some point on, as we transition into DIS JVS as a single low-side repository, what changes need to be made to that as we start to roll out the transfer of trust and reestablishment of trust model. But each one has its own kind of core deep dive focus. We spend an hour on the phone. There's small group sessions. We limit them to 9 to 10 people. So if we end up with 30 people who are interested, we do 3 calls. So that way everyone has a chance to have their voice heard and their ideas heard. Each one's broken into 4 or 5 bigger questions. And then we open the question and let you guys talk. So if you're interested in providing feedback or participating in making the process better, please attend those. Or if you just think there's like a really healthy topic that we should be engaging with industry on, send us an email and say you should do a listening tour session on X, and because there's a lot for people to say, let us know. We'll add it to the list. Participate.
That's great. Lindy, how are we on time? Do we have?
You're out of time.
We're out of time. All right.
Perfect.
This is the only way I
REM.
can get Matt to stay for happy hour, though. 'Cause I
Not a
asked him,
chance.
and what his admin said. He was like, what are my odds? He's like, good luck, we're going to be in there.
Yeah.
Ask him questions for the next 2 hours, and it'll be 40. Best socks of the day
Yes.
so far. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, Brett. Ask them questions afterwards, email them, send them, but otherwise get down.
Well, we saw Tim Calhoun was in the room, so we needed to take all the time.
Well, I think it's fair to say we would not be nearly as far along in the arc of reform as we are without you two. So we thank you for your leadership, your service, and appreciate you coming up today. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.